Okay, yo. I'm Gerry Lawson. I think we've done introductions a few times already, but I'm Heiltsuk. My Heiltsuk name is Malagus. I help run a program called Indigitization out of UBC, but we also have a couple of partners at the University of Northern BC Archive, UBC Okanagan campus. This is my dad, Chester Lawson. Komakwa is his Heiltsuk name. He's one of our traditional Heatmoss. He's got one of our chief's names in the community, and he's the reason that I do the work that I do. Like all of us, we feel a responsibility to language and cultural vitality and to living in our culture. I grew up mostly in the city, and I will say that most of our culture is singing and dancing and drumming, and these are things that I'm not good at and feel really uncomfortable with. But when I took a tour of our Heiltsuk Cultural Education Center, so quickly, this is where I work. It's a Museum of Anthropology at UBC, most known for our Northwest Coast collections and the artwork of Bill Reed. We have world arts and culture, but really we're most known for the Indigenous collections local to British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest. This is the lab that I manage, and I don't know why this is potato quality now, but it's also very clean, which it hasn't been in about 10 years, so this is a very old photograph.
Potato quality. Shot with the potato.
Shot with a potato. And this is what I'm talking about. A lot of these tapes are from the Heiltsuk Cultural Education Center, something we call the vault. And it's literally it's a closet, a temperature, like environmentally controlled closet, but it is where our most precious recordings are. And I took a tour of this probably in the late 80s, early 90s, and there were already formats that we couldn't play. There were already tapes, recordings inaccessible to our community. These are things like open reel audio, audio cassette, open reel video, VHS, beta, camcorder formats. Our communities recorded on everything we could get our hands on. And anthropologists and ethnomusicologists and Indian agents and other people came into our communities and recorded us and often extracted that. And then sometimes repatriated, sometimes gave us a copy of those recordings back. And they often sit on these plastic formats that we often don't have machines that are in good condition that we can play them back safely. Sometimes the tapes themselves degrade, so we can't safely play them back. So digital preservation is the thing that communities have been asking about for 20 years. And they'd go up to mostly archivists and they'd ask, how do I digitize these to preserve them and make them accessible? And the archival community has a very sort of strange culture, in that they're very gatekeepy about things like preservation and digitization. And there are things called archival best practices. They're created by audio and video engineers and archivists, and they don't even speak the same language themselves. So I would say archivists don't understand all of their best practices, and technicians don't understand all of the best practices. And the jargon that they use is so impenetrable that I was doing this for years, and I would go down a Google rabbit hole trying to figure out what harmonic distortion is and how to measure it. And they would give you specifications you had to meet that the manufacturer never released. You had no way of knowing if things met. And the Library of Congress response is, well, buy a whole bunch of these several $100 piece of equipment, test them, see which ones are good, and then use that one. And for a small community organization, and it's not just our little organizations, it's every small heritage organization, best practice didn't meet the needs of any of us. And so what I found is that best practices didn't scale to actual practices. And so archivists were pushed out into the world being told, you're the experts. But there were very few opportunities for archivists even to get training on actual practical digitization. They didn't know how to do it, but they were told they're the experts. And the sort of recent graduates are the people our communities could afford to hire. And they would go out and they would write report after report saying, use these best practices, that didn't turn into practices. So none of us were getting started. And that's where I got involved in a pilot project called Indigitization. And just to put it into context, here in BC, 36 languages, 93 dialects, over 200 communities, and these collections exist in all of those communities. So we have probably tens of thousands of cassette tapes. In fact, I know we do because we've helped to digitize about 15,000 of them. And so we also have this sort of density and diversity here in BC that make this a perfect place to develop practices. It's a nice sort of boundary for me to work in that I can get to know these communities, but I can't get to know the world. right? So if I develop practices that work here, they work almost anywhere. And so just quickly going through, this is an open reel tape. Because Hawaii is the place, and this wasn't planned. This is part of the teaching collection. This just happened to be something somebody gave me. Hawaiian Paradise, delightful music of the islands. So this is, so it's funny how many Hawaiian open reel tapes there are, but I'll pass this around, have a look. So when do you think open reel was, say, invented? Anybody?
60s. 1940.
Okay, closer. It was invented in the 1930s in Germany. And so when do you think it actually came commercially that we could use it to record? Like, what do you think the earliest recording that I've digitized is?
Probably 31.
Sorry?
31.
I'll say 1890. Oh wait, does it have to be with this?
That, open reel. Yeah,
Open reel.
yeah,
Sorry. 1950. I stopped.
close. So it's 1948. So I digitized a group of tapes from 1948, and this sort of goes to the Government of Canada, that when Harper was in government, Library and Archives Canada was tasked with only keeping commemoration. No national history, only things that commemorate the awesome things that Canada did. So a professor at UBC in social work was gifted a file box from Library and Archives Canada that they were deaccessioning. So they just gave it to a white dude. In the bottom of the box, 6 open reel recordings from ship time in the Arctic. I think it might have been a Iqaluit, but it was a place. These are dialects that don't exist anymore. So at some point after 1948, everybody lived in family groups out on the land. The Government of Canada killed their sled dogs and forced them to urbanize. And all of the family dialects were lost. So the recordings that I digitized were family dialects that don't exist anymore, that was recorded by an Indian agent and that were just given away by Library and Archives Canada. But this professor had me digitize them at my lab for a student from the area, an Indigenous student who was working on them for his thesis. So it immediately went into the study of like us about us, which is amazing. But so when do you think the last open reel recorder was made, like manufactured?
80s?
Sorry?
90s.
90s. Except it's a trick question. During COVID, there's something generational that all of this is making a comeback. That there's this guy out in Langley, like close to Vancouver, who used to do like AV installs for stadiums. And during COVID, none of that was happening. So he started repairing, like his almost hobby, his side gig was repairing open reel players. And now that's his main thing. He's got about 40 of them available, fully serviced, tested for 24 hours, available to purchase at any time. So you can buy one of these things. It's the best time in my lifetime to buy one of these things, almost. But on top of that, Revox, one of the best companies, has brought back one of the, a brand new open reel player, the B77, which is, let's see. So, PowerPoint is taking over the computer, so we're not going to bother. So they're making a brand new open reel player again, one of the best ones. It costs like 15 grand, so if you've got a grant, go for it. So let's, all right, so let's talk audio cassettes.
Give me a grant.
So audio cassettes. I'm just going to go through this a bit more quickly. Invented in the early 1960s, really became available in sort of mid to late 1960s. And because we knew how to get these into court for land claims, we kept recording on these in our communities into the 2000s. So well after we had digital recording technologies, we didn't know how to get digital into court cases without it being challenged, but we knew how to get audio cassette information. Cheers?
Mariella, we used to cover the tops of the cassette tapes and then we could record the radio. We used to make our own little cassette tapes on the radio.
And then wrap over it.
Wrap over it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So VHS, invented about 1977, became out in 77, I think 76 in Japan, out in 77 North America. We were recording on this immediately in community. And so if you ever heard of hi-fi audio, There's a difference between normal audio on these things and hi-fi audio, and I've got a track pattern, but the earliest tapes until about 1983 or 84, they only had normal audio, and hi-fi audio literally is about the quality of CD audio. It's really, really good, and it doesn't change with whether you're on standard speed, extended speed, or long speed. But if you're digitizing one of your early tapes, chances are your digitization equipment will have no audio because you have to switch in your VCR to only play the normal audio track because it probably has no hi-fi. So 8mm tape, this came out in 1984 and was actually, so it's a small tape. It's one of these things here that my dad recorded a basketball game on that I was going to digitize, but we don't have VCR. So this is actually way better quality than the full-size VHS tapes. And so a lot of times when in cultural centers, you'll get a VHS tape that is of a potlatch of something else. It probably came off of a different format. It probably came off of like a SVHAC, a mini DV, 8mm. And so if you can find the original camcorder, you'll get a way better quality digitization than they often would dub it to VHS for playing at home. So just quickly about magnetic media, what is it? It's basically it's a strip of something fairly strong, like a base of plastic, like polyester. Sometimes there's this medium layer with a middle layer and then an oxide layer where it's got metal particles that can be magnetized, that can hold a polarity and a strength of magnetism. And you want it to be able to be magnetized easily enough, but not too easily, because then it flips itself. You want it to be able to be erasable. So it has to have these exact properties. And so the different metal formulas, like for cassettes, you have different quality of tape. There's chrome tape, there's iron tape. And those are all about that metal particle that's suspended in it and how easily or not easily it can be flipped and charged, and how accurately it can hold the charge. And so pretty much all magnetic tape, open reel, VHS, everything is like this. And for things like VHS tapes, you have a head that actually goes into the tape as it passes through. So depending on how hard this tape is, it depends on how fast your machine wears. So a lot of people will like grab one type of tape and think it makes no difference, and they'll start playing it back on a machine. Like you'll spool it onto something it wasn't meant to be. And oftentimes they'll just like wear down their head super fast because it was the wrong type of tape. So quickly talking about audio tape. It just records in strips along the tape. So early cassette tapes, like before say late 1960s, early 1970s, was just mono. So it would record, when you put the tape in one side, it's recording on half of the tape in mono. You flip it over and that side becomes the other side, and then it's recording this way. So basically like flipping the head over. And then it turned into stereo, and it just made a more discrete head. So that head was split in half so you could record stereo, which means that any stereo player can play any of the early tapes too. And so the quality of these things gets better and better the faster that tape is going. You can record higher and higher frequencies. So for like early open reel tapes, now I'm going to flip over. You remember how open reel tapes existed from the 1940s. They're still making it. They still manufacture tape, which means that something could be recorded in the 1960s, sit on a shelf for 20 years, and then in the 1980s, somebody can pick that up and record over top of it. So you have no idea what's going on with an open reel tape. So it can be any track pattern where you have like full track, half track, a quarter inch. The quarter inch can be literally like music creation where you have guitar, drum track, vocals, everything going in the same direction, or it can be mono, like one direction, the other direction, the other direction, the other direction. So it could be like a 7-inch reel, could be 7.5 minutes, or it could be like 16 hours of information. You have no idea just by looking at the reel as to what's on it. And it can be one of 6 speeds. So It's not here, but it goes from below an inch a second, 15/16 inches per second, all the way up to 32 inches per second, I think it is, or no, 30 inches per second. And each speed is double the last. And so usually open reel machines, the speed is controlled by just gearing. Just a different size gear tire goes against a spinning comb, yeah, and or cog, yeah. So usually it's a plastic gear, but like a wheel. Like for like radio logging, you can have something recording at under an inch a second, and it'll record like several hours on a single reel. So it's a really interesting format in that you have no idea what it is. Although audio cassette is almost always 1 7/8 inches per second, so you almost always know what a cassette is. So they tried to record video on a linear tape, just with like a static head and just making the tape go faster and faster and faster until the point where it got super dangerous. And they found they could, like, it just wasn't super successful. And so for video, yeah. So audio is recorded in what's called low frequency. So you're recording up to maybe 24 kilohertz, so 24,000 waves per second. Video is radio frequency. So it's they encode a whole bunch of stuff into video, including like electrical timing for your monitor, color and hue are recorded into a frequency, whereas brightness is recorded into the voltage. And what they did was they put the head on a spinning drum and let the drum spin at 1800 RPM rather than trying to just make the tape go faster and faster. So with VHS, what you have is diagonal recordings so this would be your normal audio track. And so the slower speed that you're recording at, the crappier the quality gets. They have what's called a control track that's almost like sprockets on a film. So because tape stretches, because tape machines run differently, they record a control track on it so that the machine that's playing on next can read that track and know how fast to play it back. Because the other machine, like I said, tape can stretch, none of these machines are perfect in terms of speed. And then the different parts of a video signal are, does anybody know what interlaced video is or why it's interlaced? Yeah. So instead of, like, now we have progressive video where you just draw a whole image like from top to bottom. In standard definition, you would draw every odd line, then every even line. So does anybody know why you would do this? Like,
less bandwidth, but your eyes blend it.
Electricity use?
it is about your eyes blending it. So it's so in standard definition, there is never a full image. Like, we've never had for like 50 years an actual image full image in standard definition. You always had like 1/30th of a second apart, or 1/60th of a second apart. You would have half images, and the reason was CRTs, which we were talking about. Don't touch that part there. So CRTs, when they first came out, they tried to draw the whole image from top to bottom, but they work by an electron gun being dragged around by a magnet, and it hits a phosphor and it glows. But the problem is, if you draw from top to bottom, it's dimming up here by the time you're redrawing. So it would, so you have this bright band following a dim band along your TV at all times. And so what they did instead was they drew half an image so we could pull it up quicker. And then that phosphor hadn't dimmed very much by the time it gets back up there. So for like 50 years, we have this weird half image format. And it's funny because when you look at like standard definition on a computer monitor, it kind of looks like crap. If you look at it on a CRT, it looks really good, right? Like, so none of our childhoods, for the people who grew up with it, remember like it looking like crap, because it didn't. It really was, yeah.
Yeah, and this is also like why, as an example, old pixel graphics on classic games,
Yeah.
the way they look shit now is because they were designed to sort of blend on the CRT.
Exactly.
Cathode
Yeah. So the other part of digitizing standard definition video is you were never meant to see the whole image. When we digitize, going back, there's 525 lines in standard definition, but only 480 were ever visible. They had something called a safe zone. And that's because early video, like I said, the video players weren't great. So you had to match the speed, and so when you entered another scan line, every diagonal line is 1/2 image. And so as the head comes into that new line, it usually wasn't aligned very well, so you'd have what's called flagging, and you would have this weird distortion going on at the top or bottom of the screen. And so what they did was they just made a safe zone. They just sort of blew it up so your TV frame would cover all of the weirdness. And what that means is you had invisible lines, and they also encoded closed captioning into one of the lines. So I think there's a Vancouver media company called Line 32 or something like that. And that's because that's the old closed captioning line where you would encode data into that hidden section. And then why is it 29.97 frames per second? I don't really know, an engineer can probably tell you, but it was 30 frames per second in black and white. And then when we made the switch to color in, I think, the 1950s, they found they couldn't encode color stably at 30 frames per second. There was some weirdness that went on every 10,000th frame or something. So at 29.97, it works perfectly for some.
Your IC's at 24, 23.97.
Yeah. So what is digitization? It's literally just making a digital representation of a thing. But what is preservation digitization? Preservation digitization is keeping track of all those things, that interlaced video, the 29.97 frames per second, sampling with accuracy. So there's these things, like $120 for a little digitization unit that you attach with USB, you download a program in like 13 seconds, you're ready to digitize, and it's pretty good. The problem is it deinterlaces, makes you a progressive image. It doesn't sample very well. Like nothing samples every single pixel along. Things will sample like red, then green, then blue. If you've ever seen something called 422 color, that tells you how many pixels are being sampled for accuracy. 444 is sampling everything. So 422 is the minimum for preservation digitization. And so there's no problem with digitizing to that. It just doesn't keep all of the integrity to what that original was, which is important for archival or long-term preservation. But for your community, if you just want a copy of that thing to use, or if you don't have the money to go down this road, then that is awesome. So preservation digitization is a little bit different in that you need to have a video interface that can capture at professional quality, that can capture that 422 sampling, capture accurately, that can hold an uncompressed copy, because an MP4 that digitizes to actually throws away information. It tries to throw away information that's not important to us, but it's not great for preservation. The problem with these things, every professional video digitization interface, the thing that takes the video in, wants an exactly stable 29.97 frames per second. And so unfortunately, like I said, tape machines are not stable. Like they're thereabouts. They're almost 30 frames per second. And a CRT monitor doesn't care. It'll just keep showing you the video. But a digitization unit does care. And so every single broadcast station, like TV station, had time-based correctors. These are usually like the 19-inch rack-mounted things. But then, I say lately, being the last 20, 25 years, you've had more desktop time-based correctors. And so this is a time-based corrector that is pretty good, and it really helps. And what that does is that strips out these timing signals in the electrical signal, replaces it with a perfect signal, and then gives you the video information. And so what your community decides to do, I don't care. I just sort of give you the information. I worked really hard. So this is a cassette digitization kit. That's the first thing we put together in my program. And the alternate to this is receiving about probably 10, 12 boxes and knowing how to put it together. When you get this, you literally have to plug it into the wall and plug USB in and plug in your headphones, and you're ready to digitize on Windows, you download a driver, and Audacity on a Mac, you just download a simple audio program, and you're ready to go follow a manual. So that's a good lead into what indigitization is. So we started off with that pilot program, developing a kit that was really easy to digitize in your own community organization. And then we were lucky enough that we made a pitch to the UBC library system. The Irving K. Barber Learning Center had an endowment with community funds available, and they invested $100,000 into turning this into a grant program. So we ran a grant for, I think, about 8 years or so, where this is what would arrive at your desk if you were doing this on your own. This is the kit that you get through us, and really it's about giving you certainty, like giving you some confidence that it's not your fault if it doesn't work, it's my fault. So if you get sent that and it doesn't work, then you call me and we figure it out. But if you just get a whole bunch of boxes, then you sort of have nowhere to start. And then we wrote a 90-page manual on how to digitize the easiest format there is to digitize. And we're lucky enough that in the pilot project, my own community was one of the members, and so this was tested in the Heiltsuk Cultural Education Center, that same place that I got my start. This is the door to that vault I was talking about, where all those tapes are. And so this is Jennifer Carpenter, and Rory Housty was the collections research assistant at the time. He's now our main language teacher in the community. And this kit is still in Bella Bella, still digitizing. We've sort of like, if you replace a ship board by board, we've replaced the audio player, we've replaced the audio interface, but that kit is still there digitizing.
How old is Rory?
Sorry?
How old is Rory?
He's probably about 40 now, I would think. But I mean, he would have been like 30 maybe then. So just going through, we had, this is Larry Grant from the Musqueam Language Program, Elder Larry Grant welcoming us, and Nancy Dan from Musqueam. And if you look at who's being trained, there's not a single demographic there. Like, we're talking about people who may have recorded these things in the first place in the 80s or 90s. So we're talking about young people who are interested in technology. So there's no gatekeeping in who can do this. Everybody can do this, and everybody can come at it from a different point of interest. There's no sort of single way that you approach this. And so this is dated, there's probably even pre-COVID, but we've ran about 50 projects. So now that's probably about 55 projects, about 15,000 cassettes in the province of BC alone. And this is just cassettes that are digitized through our grants. That doesn't count the equipment being purchased and people keeping on digitizing after the program ended, like the programmatic stuff. And because I've talked to a bunch of people about this, but our grant was really based in community understandings, that I worked for the Union of BC Indian Chiefs before going to UBC. I'm from a community. My boss, Ann Stevenson, had worked for Stolo as their archaeology manager. And so she would give up her office to the person who reported to her for doing cultural healing and cultural ceremony. There was, let's see, Mimi Lamb also worked with us at Union of BC Indian Chiefs. So the entire program is not UBC. It's really based in people who've worked directly for community organizations and understand those pinch points, which means that we didn't make people have things openly accessible for 5 years after digitizing. We did like, I would say, trauma-aware programming, where we knew people would have difficulty. We made sure there was spaces for them, that people could just leave if things got heavy or they just felt like it. People could leave the workshop. We had managers could come in for the first 2 or 3 days of a 5-day workshop, and then the technicians would stay for the full time. So managers would get what they needed. We front-ended that, and then technicians would get more practice. And then we were lucky enough that. Or effective enough that we had Library and Archives Canada, Listen to Hear Our Voices came and talked to us and encoded a lot of things from our grant into their Listen to Hear Our Voices grant, and that got better and better over time. The First Nations, or First Peoples Cultural Council, their Digi grant that turned into their Language Technology grant is based off of the Indigitization grant, the digitization part of it. So we had a National Research Council grant, about 4 years ago, that sort of went sideways in that we were creating a whole bunch of new guides that were like a mile wide and an inch deep. And then COVID hit. We were going to have all these expensive regional training programs, workshops, and then we couldn't run any workshops. So to make up for that, we decided to make our manuals a mile deep too. And of course, you can't run a project like that. As soon as you change the scope of a project, if you didn't plan for that scope, it breaks. And so now I'm in the painful process of aligning about 60 manuals for examples and for, so that they're not working against each other in terms of being teaching aids. So toolkit expansions, new lending kits, new formats. We have kits for OpenReel, which are a little bit more varied in terms of we're mostly lending players and people have their own audio interface and computer. These are the sort of current partners in terms of developing and delivering grants and resources. And these are some of the pictures from recent community work. This is Jessica Brooks at the Haida Museum, ripping apart one of the first digitization kits that I made in order to put a new audio interface in, that an 18i8. So instead of just 2 channels in, it'll take in, I think, 8 channels. And she can hook it up for OpenReel digitization, micro mini cassette digitization, all just changing software, like just changing her configuration in software without having to rewire anything. This is Colton Humshit at the Heiltsuk Cultural Education Center putting together a video digitization unit. And then I talked a little bit about this as well. These are some random shots of the network at the Heiltsuk Cultural Education Center. And I'm not trying to shame anybody, but this is a busy community organization. And this is looking down in between floors where like wires are just sort of hanging down. This is the wire to the printer. Let's see, and I think, so somewhere back here is a 10 base T switch for the people who know networking. That's not current. So that's literally 10 megabit. And that's a connection thing connecting all of their computers together and their computers to the internet. So even if they had like, you know, a 10, what? Yeah, yeah, a 5010 connection, it wasn't going to their computers. So this is Colton cutting some conduit. So we basically rewired the culture. I forgot that it actually wasn't even wired in the first place. So this was the first time there was a structured cabling. This is what this area looked like. And this is the same shelf with the rack cabinet, with a RAID unit, with a 10 gigabit switch, and a, I think, 1 gigabit switch, depending upon where things are being routed to. This is what the cabling used to look like. And this is the, so we didn't bother running the, so there were weird braces in the wall. So we tried to run it down through the wall and then just found that we didn't have like a long bit that was going to be, like there were sort of weird diagonal cross braces. So we just said, fuck it, and came down the side. But this is the video digitization unit, and this is connected to their new RAID with a 10 gigabit connection. And so the difference is at normal speeds that we usually are using 1 gigabit connection, a 250 gigabyte file that's sort of a normal VHS digitization would take about 35 minutes, and it takes 3.5 minutes with this setup. So it means that you can actually do video digitization work, do it efficiently, do it effectively, not have the file transfers and a lot of that in the way of your workflow. So this is a workshop at the in Calgary at the Blackfoot Confederacy. This is a workshop in Edmonton. So the Edmonton Heritage Council has taken on the resources that we've developed, and they've included them into the fire grants around Edmonton. And so this is.
Did you work with Jessica Johns or
Yes.
Emily Riddle?
Jessica, I have a meeting with her next week.
Gerry Lawson.
And Kayla is here. So, and Kayla was our program manager for a little while in Indigitization. And so here, I am helping a woman whose laptop is crashing whenever she tries to hit record because of a problem of the generation of the interface. And like often happens, I turn around and everybody's bawling in this corner because I think it's Desiree is listening to her grandfather sitting at the kitchen table talking about family history in the 1970s. She brought some of her own tapes to digitize. And so she's hearing, she hasn't heard his voice since the 90s, but she's hearing a younger version of his voice. And this happens all the time. So when you're doing these presentations, you forget, like, you sort of lose yourself in the techno cool of it or the, nostalgia of it, and you forget how important this is. And then you're quickly grounded when it comes to things like this. And then this is Me and Metlakatla last fall, just outside of Prince Rupert, and this is Fanny, who's one of their matriarchs. She was having a feast the next week. I got the very best gifts for training, got salmon and knit toques. But Fanny is the digitization tech. So they just adjusted the workflow a little bit. So she didn't have to do a lot of metadata. She didn't have to do a lot of technical stuff, but she could just sit there and transfer the tapes, but then write down information. And so the first thing we were digitizing was a gathering from 82, I think it was, of different communities to talk about treaty. And she could tell you all of the speakers, one after the other. She knew them personally. And that's the importance of, like I said, this could have been an 18-year-old kid who wouldn't know those speakers, but he could do a great job of the transfer process and be really interested in technology and sit there immersed in culture and language. Or it can be the person who helped with the original recordings and knows the people, knows their speaking patterns, knows what they're saying in ways that we don't anymore generationally. Elders spoke with different sort of cadences, and they'd use a different turn of phrase, and it's sort of vague, and you can think, okay, they might have meant this, they might have, but the people who knew them know exactly what they were saying. So.
Sorry, where is that information being kept? Like when they're recording?
In my
Oh.
data center.
So that's the thing. So this is a small community archive with a couple of people, and so this will be on external hard drives. They'll keep three hard drives, and we try to preach the 3-2-1 method. So 3 copies, 2 different types of media, like brands or models, because things tend to fail along factory lines. If you buy everything at the same store at the same time, they'll all be awesome or they'll all fail. That just tends to be the way technology works. So, and then 1 offsite. So you want to keep 3 copies, and we used to say at least 2 copies and try to keep 1 in a different disaster zone, at least in a different building in case of fire or vandalism. But like 3-2-1 is what we're trying to get people to do now. And so they're keeping them, I think, on 2 hard drives right now, but they're going to be buying another one and then sort of migrating one on and off site. Yep. Yep. And like I said, so on the coast, we're in tsunami zones and any number of hazards can happen. So you want to keep one far enough away that, if a tsunami wipes out your building, it doesn't wipe out the building that your backup's in. Just like we were talking about yesterday in the game, you try to build redundancy and you try to be able to predict what's going to happen. So this is just quickly going to go through this. This is one of the funnest things and the best things that I've ever done. This is part of our Indigenous internship program at MOA. Marlene from Bella Coola, from New Hulk Nation, came down, and this is one of the tapes she brought with her. And it looks kind of funny, looks ridiculous. So this cassette came apart. I'm hoping it has stories or songs on it. I don't know if it can be fixed. There was a guy, Jeff Snow, who was working on it. And I want to say he did exactly the right thing. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to pull on it, you don't want to damage it, but you also don't want to just keep that spaghetti mess from to get dusty or to get hair or small things make a difference. So he put them into plastic bags. He protected those things, and he knew it was sort of within his skill. And so, so this is Marlene. This is Pablo. He's 18. He was one of our interns. And you can see him splicing the tape here, and I've talked a lot about that. Is that splicing cassette tape is a lot like splicing other things. You give it to the youngest person with the best eyes and the nimblest fingers. So that's why Marlene and I are watching. But now is this, there we go. So we were in the room beside my office, the 3 of us, just patiently untangling this thing. Marlene is working the knot. Pablo would pull it, he'd hand it to me, I'd be 15 feet away, and we'd just be patiently...
like a microfiber cloth on the table and stuff?
Yep, yeah, you make sure your surfaces are clean. This is a room that's used for visit with belongings, and there we are. So, so what was on the tape is 3 of Marlene's family cry songs from... that they didn't have, that were sung by her grandma. And so our cry songs are our grief songs. They're what we sing when somebody passes away. So there'll be a night where we all come together in in a big house or somewhere, and the people who do our cultural work will sing our cry songs. So without them, we don't grieve properly. And so that's what's on this tape. Like, so we have community ones. Like, they're always ones that are kind of loaned to us when we don't have ours or don't know if we had them in the first place. But so that's what was on this tape. And it was all on places where there was no splice, where like it was all on undamaged tape. And so Marlene digitized this herself in this room, and so brought that back to her family like immediately after in digital form. So that's it for the PowerPoint.